No one expected the quiet afternoon to turn into chaos, but the moment Karen stepped into the schoolyard, everything changed. Children stopped laughing, teachers fell silent, and a strange tension spread, hinting that something shocking was about to happen right before their innocent eyes that day. She was known around the neighborhood for interfering in everything, but no one imagined she would come this far. That day, she marched toward the playground with anger in her eyes, determined to control something that was never hers in front of watching frightened little children. At first, the children thought she was just another adult passing by, but her voice quickly shattered their comfort. She began shouting strange orders, pointing at their toys, and demanding they stop playing, as if she owned the place entirely without any reason or explanation whatsoever. Teachers noticed the tension building and stepped outside to understand what was happening, but Karen refused to listen. Her interference grew louder, more aggressive, and strangely personal, as if she was trying to prove something to an audience that did not exist for anyone watching nearby. One small boy clutched his sister's hand, unsure whether to run or stay. The air felt heavy, filled with confusion and fear. Karen's voice kept rising, echoing across the yard, making every child feel like they were suddenly in danger and nobody knew what would happen. Parents nearby began to notice the commotion and slowly gathered at the gates, whispering to one another. No one understood why Karen was acting this way, or why she seemed determined to frighten the children who were only playing peacefully under the warm afternoon sunlight outside. Suddenly, she grabbed a ball and threw it aside, startling everyone watching. A gasp spread across the playground as the children stepped back, their eyes wide with disbelief. No one expected an adult to act in such an unpredictable and frightening way right before them today. A teacher finally approached her, speaking calmly and asking her to step away from the children. For a moment, it seemed like she might listen, but then her anger grew stronger, and her interference escalated in a way no one could predict on that shocking day. The children watched everything unfold, their innocent eyes capturing moments they would never forget. Whispers spread among them as they tried to understand why someone would bring such fear into a place meant for laughter and friendship and safety during that unforgettable afternoon at school playground. What happened next would leave every witness speechless and change how they saw her forever. The interference was only beginning, and what the children saw that day would become a story whispered for years, a moment frozen in their memories permanently for all of their lives. The playground had never felt so quiet. Even the wind seemed to slow, as if it was watching the strange scene unfold. The children stood frozen, their small hands gripping toys tightly, unsure whether to run or stay. Karen remained in the center, her presence heavy and unsettling. The teacher tried again, speaking gently, asking her to step away. For a moment, Karen looked calm, almost as if she might listen. But then her eyes shifted toward the children, and something in her expression changed. It was no longer just anger. It was control. She began pointing at the playground equipment, claiming the children were using it wrong, that they were too loud, too messy, too careless. Her voice rose louder with every word. Some children lowered their heads. Others stepped behind their friends, hiding from the sound of her shouting. One little girl began to cry quietly. Her brother wrapped his arms around her, trying to protect her from something he didn't fully understand. They weren't just scared. They were confused. Adults were supposed to make things feel safe, not frightening. Parents outside the gate started recording, whispering among themselves. No one wanted to step in too quickly, but everyone could see this was getting worse. Karen wasn't calming down. She was becoming more intense, moving closer to the children, invading their space. Then something unexpected happened. A group of children near the swings noticed Karen picking up a backpack from the ground. She opened it without permission and started searching through it, muttering under her breath. The children stared, shocked. That bag belonged to one of them. The owner of the bag, a small boy wearing a red shirt, stepped forward nervously. His voice shook as he asked her to stop. For a moment, Karen froze. Then she turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouting. Teachers quickly moved closer, their calm faces hiding growing concern. They asked her to put the bag down. But Karen refused. Instead, she held it tighter, as if she was proving a point no one understood. That was the moment the children saw something they would never forget. It wasn't just her actions. It was the look in her eyes, cold, distant, and completely disconnected from the fear around her. The playground no longer felt like a place for games. It felt like something was very wrong. Parents at the gate began pushing inside, sensing the situation had crossed a line. And just as the tension reached its peak, Karen did something that made every child gasp in disbelief. For a second, no one moved. The boy in the red shirt stood there, frozen, his small hands trembling as Karen held his backpack tightly in her grip. The playground felt like it had stopped breathing. Even the other children stopped whispering. Every eye was fixed on what she would do next. Then, without warning, Karen turned the bag upside down. Books, pencils, and small personal things spilled across the ground. A lunchbox rolled away, its lid popping open as it hit the pavement. The sound of things falling echoed louder than it should have. A few children gasped. One little girl covered her mouth in shock. The boy stared at the mess, his eyes wide. It wasn't just his belongings scattered everywhere. It was the way it happened. Rough, cold, uncaring. A teacher quickly rushed forward, kneeling down beside him, trying to gather his things. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands moved fast. She asked Karen to step back again, this time more firmly. But Karen didn't move. Instead, she pointed at the items on the ground and began speaking loudly, claiming she was checking something. Her words didn't make sense to the children. They only saw an adult destroying a moment of safety. Parents who had entered the gate now stood closer. Some were recording, others were speaking on their phones. The tension was growing heavier by the second. One child whispered, "Why is she doing that?" No one had an answer. Another teacher guided the children a few steps back, trying to keep them calm. But it was too late. They had already seen everything. The fear on the boy's face. The way his things were thrown. The strange look in Karen's eyes. Then something unexpected caught everyone's attention. As the items lay scattered, a small photo slipped out from one of the books. It landed face up near Karen's feet. She paused. For the first time since arriving, she looked down quietly. The photo showed the boy standing beside an older man, both smiling. It looked like a special memory. Something important. Karen stared at it longer than anyone expected. The noise around her seemed to fade. Even the children noticed her sudden silence. For a moment, she looked different. Not angry, not loud, just still. The teacher gently reached down and picked up the photo, handing it back to the boy. He held it tightly against his chest. But just as it seemed like things might calm down, Karen suddenly stepped forward again, her voice sharper than before. And what she said next made the children look at each other in complete disbelief. Karen's voice cut through the silence like a sudden storm. She pointed toward the boy and began speaking loudly, her tone filled with accusation. No one fully understood what she meant, but the sharpness in her words made the children step back even further. The fear was growing, and the confusion was worse. The boy clutched the photo tightly to his chest, his eyes wide and uncertain. He looked at the teachers as if asking for help without saying a word. One teacher stepped in front of him protectively, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, trying to shield him from the moment. Parents had now gathered much closer. Some were whispering angrily, others looked worried. A few began telling the staff to remove Karen immediately. The playground, once full of laughter, had turned into a tense scene where no one felt safe anymore. Karen, however, seemed completely unaware of the fear she was causing. She kept talking, her voice rising and falling, her hands moving as she pointed at different things around her. It felt less like she was speaking to people and more like she was trying to prove something only she understood. The children watched carefully. Every movement she made felt unpredictable. One girl slowly reached for her friend's hand. Another child quietly wiped tears from his eyes. They didn't know what would happen next, but they could feel the tension growing stronger. Then something unexpected happened again. A younger child, no older than 5, stepped forward slightly. He wasn't trying to be brave. He simply didn't understand what was happening. In his small voice, he asked Karen why she was yelling. The question stopped everything. Karen froze. For the first time, she didn't shout. She didn't point. She didn't move. The simple, innocent question hung in the air, echoing louder than any argument. The teachers looked at each other, surprised. The parents grew quiet. The little boy didn't realize what he had done. He was only confused. To him, adults were supposed to be kind. He couldn't understand why one of them was bringing fear into a place meant for play. Karen slowly turned toward him. Her expression changed again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was something else, something the children couldn't fully understand. For a brief moment, the tension shifted into something almost uncomfortable to watch. And then, from outside the gate, a distant sound began to rise. A siren. It grew louder with every passing second, and suddenly everyone realized what was happening. Someone had called for help. The children looked toward the entrance, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Karen turned as well, her posture stiffening as the sound came closer. What happened next, right in front of the children, would become the moment no one would ever forget. The sound of the siren grew louder, echoing across the playground and sending a wave of tension through everyone standing there. Children turned toward the gate, some curious, others nervous. Parents stepped aside, creating space without saying a word. Everyone understood that something serious was about to happen. Karen stood still in the center of the yard, her shoulders tense, her eyes fixed on the entrance. For the first time since she arrived, she looked uncertain. The confidence in her voice was gone. Her hands slowly dropped to her sides as the siren came closer. Within moments, a police car stopped just outside the gate. 2 officers stepped out, their presence calm but firm. The playground fell into complete silence. Even the smallest children stopped moving. The only sound left was the soft rustle of wind and the distant hum of the car engine. One officer walked forward slowly, speaking gently, asking what was happening. A teacher quickly explained the situation, pointing toward the scattered items on the ground and the frightened children standing close together. Parents nodded, quietly adding their own words. Karen tried to speak over them, her voice rising again, but it didn't carry the same control as before. This time, people weren't listening the way they had earlier. The focus had shifted. The officers remained calm, asking her to step away from the children so they could talk. She hesitated. The pause felt long and heavy. Then, slowly, she stepped back. The boy in the red shirt was still holding his photo tightly. A teacher knelt beside him, helping him gather the rest of his things. Other children began to move again, but they stayed close to each other, still watching everything unfold. One of the officers crouched down to speak gently to the children, asking if they were okay. Some nodded quietly, others stayed silent, their eyes still locked on Karen. It wasn't just what had happened that stayed with them. It was what they had seen. They had watched an adult lose control. They had seen fear in a place that was meant to be safe. And now, they were watching something they had never seen before, adults being held responsible in front of them. Karen kept trying to explain herself, her words fast and scattered. But the officers stayed patient, listening, guiding her toward the gate so the children could have space again. As she was led away from the playground, the tension began to fade. The children slowly stepped forward, one by one, returning to the swings, the slides, the quiet comfort of familiar places. But something had changed. They would remember this day. The shouting, the fear, the moment everything felt uncertain. And just when it seemed like it was finally over, one child noticed something that made them stop and stare again. As the officers guided Karen toward the gate, most of the children slowly began returning to their normal routines. A few picked up their toys. Others walked quietly back toward the swings. The teachers stayed close, offering soft smiles and gentle words, trying to bring back a sense of calm. But then one small girl near the slide stopped moving. She was staring toward the gate, her eyes focused on something the others hadn't noticed yet. She gently tugged on her friend's sleeve and pointed. Within seconds, a few more children turned their heads to look in the same direction. Karen had paused just before stepping out. For a brief moment, she turned around and looked back at the playground. It wasn't an angry look this time. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, almost uncertain. The children didn't fully understand why, but something about that single moment made them feel still again. The boy in the red shirt noticed it too. He stood holding his backpack, the photo safely tucked inside now. Their eyes met for only a second. No one spoke. The playground was silent once more, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. One officer gently encouraged Karen to keep moving. She hesitated again, then slowly stepped forward and walked through the gate. The moment she disappeared from sight, a strange feeling spread through the yard. It wasn't fear anymore, it was relief. Teachers began guiding the children back into small groups. Some children started talking again, their voices soft at first, then slowly returning to normal. A few even began laughing, the sound light and careful, like they were testing if everything was truly okay again. But the boy in the red shirt remained quiet. A teacher noticed and sat beside him. She spoke gently, asking if he was all right. He nodded, but his eyes still looked thoughtful, like he was trying to understand everything that had just happened. What did she want? He asked quietly. The teacher paused. It was a simple question, but not an easy one to answer. She gave a soft smile and told him that sometimes adults make mistakes, and what mattered most was that everyone was safe now. He looked down at his backpack, then back toward the gate. And then he said something so unexpected that the teacher was left speechless. He didn't talk about being scared. He didn't talk about being upset. He simply said, "I think she was sad." The teacher didn't know what to say. Because in that moment, the children hadn't just seen fear. They had seen something much deeper. And what happened next would leave every adult there thinking about that day in a completely different way. The teacher sat quietly beside the boy, still thinking about what he had said. "I think she was sad." The words stayed in her mind, repeating over and over. Around them, the playground slowly returned to life. Laughter began to rise again, soft at first, then stronger. But for many of the adults standing there, something felt different. Parents who had rushed in earlier now stood near the gate, talking in low voices. Some looked relieved, others looked thoughtful. What had started as fear had turned into something else entirely, a moment that made everyone pause and reflect. The teachers began guiding the children back into their normal routine. A group gathered near the swings, taking turns again. Another group started a small game near the slide. Bit by bit, the sense of safety returned, wrapping around the playground like it always had before. But no one had forgotten what happened. The boy in the red shirt finally zipped his backpack and stood up. He looked toward the gate one last time, then joined the other children. His steps were slow at first, but soon he was running again, just like before. Watching him, the teacher felt something shift inside her. Children saw the world in ways adults often forgot. Where adults saw anger, fear, and control, the boy had seen something else. Sadness. That simple thought began spreading quietly among the staff and parents as they talked. Maybe the situation had been frightening. Maybe it had crossed a line. But perhaps it had also been a moment that showed how deeply actions can affect others, especially the youngest hearts watching closely. One parent shook her head softly and said, "They saw everything." Another replied, "Yes, but maybe they also understood more than we did." The sound of children laughing grew louder now. The tension was gone. The yard was alive again. A ball rolled across the ground, and a group of kids ran after it, shouting and smiling as if the earlier chaos had been replaced by something brighter. Life was moving forward. The teachers exchanged quiet glances, silently agreeing to be more watchful, more protective. Not just of the children's safety, but of their peace. Because what they had witnessed wasn't just a scene of interference. It was a reminder that children notice everything. They remember voices, expressions, and moments adults think they'll forget. And sometimes, they understand feelings that adults can't even see. As the afternoon sun began to lower, casting warm light across the playground, the place felt whole again. But deep down, everyone knew this was a day they would always remember. Not because of fear, but because of what the children saw, and what they understood.
If you enjoyed the, don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends and drop your thoughts in the comments.